Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Baloscha. And the very end of the portion tells us the story about Miriam and Aaron, the sister and the brother of Moshe, complaining about Moshe about the fact that Isha Kushas Lakach, that he took a Ethiopian woman. And in response, God comes down and says, you should not complain about Moshe, my servant, because Moshe is a very trusted servant of God and a prophet, and his prophecy is on a level much beyond you, Miriam and Aaron, and therefore you have no right to complain. The nature of the story and the marriage needs to be discussed at another time. I just would like to focus on the differences that are stated here between Moshe and the other prophets. And I'm going to focus on Maimonides' view of prophecy, but before I do that, I'd like to give you the alternative view of prophecy. Most commentators understand prophecy as a special miracle, a gift from God. God wants to tell the people a message, and he chooses a prophet to give that message, whether that message is through Moshe or it's through Bilam, the pagan prophet, later on in the Torah. And sometimes he comes to Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, when he has Sarah in his palace. And it seems that there's no difference made between those which are righteous and those which are not righteous. Generally speaking, it's understood that God is going to choose those that are righteous, but he chooses those that are needed at the time, and therefore sometimes it's Bilam, who we call Bilam Harasha, Bilam the wicked one, or Avimelech, who's a Philistine king, which Avram claims, Ein yiras Elokim b'makom hazeh, there's no fear of God. So the essential ingredient is God's need to have a messenger at that time, or a message that he wants to give to a particular person. But generally speaking, these commentators would say that if you're a righteous person and you're somebody who's deserving, you will be the one that God will choose to be the prophet. And then God comes down in a miraculous fashion and appears to you, whether it's a dream or a vision or through an angel. Maimonides, on the other hand, in his Guide for the Perplexed, talks about prophecy in a very rationalistic version of the understanding of prophecy. And he follows what he says is Aristotle's view of prophecy, more or less. And the general idea is that prophecy is a natural phenomenon. And it needs a long discussion, but in summary, what Maimonides holds is that a philosopher is a prophet when he reaches the highest level of philosophy. That's what prophecy is. Prophecy is knowledge of that God passes down to this earth. And the way God passes down knowledge is through human beings, through their intellect, through their apprehension, through their ability to discern one thing from the other. Whether it's on a low level, it's intuition, or a higher level, it's understanding the nature of the world and all of the rules of the world. But Maimonides holds it's a natural phenomenon. And therefore, he understands that Moshe, in a sense, is the greatest philosopher of all times. And he says that when in another passage in the Torah, when God says, in response to Moshe's request to see that he wants to see the honor and the glory of God, he says, Ani aver kol tuvi al panecha, I will pass all of my goodness before you. And Maimonides understands, what does that mean, pass all my goodness? Well, in the story of creation, every day it says, Vayar Elokim ki tov, God saw that it was good. And at the end of 6 days, Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa v'nei tov ma'od. God saw all that he made, and that it was very good. Tov, goodness, defines the natural world. And God is saying, you, Moshe, have the ability to see kol tuvi, all of my goodness. You understand all that is created. And he says he understands the interconnectedness between all of them. And therefore, if you're a great philosopher, and a philosopher doesn't mean just in theory, but actually in knowledge, and you have the ability to understand how they're all connected, you, by definition, know how the world works, and you can prophesy. And that's exactly what prophecy is. And therefore, Moshe is the greatest prophet. And therefore, that's how he explains the passage here in this portion, that he says, Pal Pal Dabrabo, mouth to mouth I will speak to him. Umar v'lo b'chidus, in a clear vision and not in riddles. Most prophets on a lower level have a vision, just like we would have a dream. And in that dream, we'd see a vision. And then we get up in the morning, we try to understand it. And the simple understanding of dreams is that your subconscious is trying to tell you something. And it doesn't always tell it to you very clearly. You have to figure it out. It's a riddle. But there's something there that there's some essential meaning behind that dream. And on a very low level, it's probably not much. But as you attain different levels of philosophy, of knowledge, of understanding God, understanding the world, that which comes to you in a dream or a vision, as it says earlier in that verse, is really a level of prophecy. And therefore, according to Maimonides, what's very interesting is that we could all be prophets on some level. We might not be at the threshold, which we're called a prophet, but we still have knowledge. And that knowledge comes from God. Ultimately, God puts knowledge in this world. He puts understanding. He gives us insight. He gives us intuition. And we have to use that in making sure that we follow the right path. And that's the path of the Torah. The path of the Torah is really all of the prophecy of Moshe, who is the greatest philosopher, scientist, and thinker that ever existed and whatever will ever exist in the world, as the Torah says at the end of the whole Chumash. So what we have here is really two very different approaches to prophecy. One, it's a miracle, and we can pray that prophecy will come back to us in this world. Another is that it's natural. And therefore, when we don't see prophets, it's only because we're not allowing ourselves to see things properly from the right perspective. We're clouded. Another discussion in another book that Maimonides wrote, he says that really prophets are all super intellectuals. The problem is that their moral habits and their character traits, their negative character traits, get in the way and filter the knowledge that's coming through. So you could be a great thinker, but if you have an ego, if you have anger, if you have certain desires, you're going to distort that knowledge that you have. Our job in our life is to make sure that, first of all, that we study, that we think, and then the real question is, do we think clearly? Or do we let our ego, do we let our desires cloud our vision? And that, I think, is the job that we all have in life, is to clear up our vision, clear up our way of seeing the world, and therefore hopefully having a clearer vision of God, and having a clearer vision of what's right and wrong in this world. Good Shabbos.